Welcome to another episode of The Groove Pod, everybody. It's been a while since we've been here, so apologies that it has been a significant delay. Nick and I have been ships passing in the night for a little while with my trip to China, and Nick's been absolutely swamped with his work commitments lately. He is coming back, and we are going to do some more podcast recording soon, but today I've actually got a special guest presenter with me. Adam is a Patreon of my YouTube channel, and we've chatted quite a bit through my Discord server. He asked me a question one day through that Discord server, I think it was, and I thought it was a really interesting topic for further discussion. So I wrote quite a long rambling post on my Patreon page in response to the question, but I also said to Adam, would he mind jumping on a podcast episode to talk about it, because I think it's an interesting topic that some of us will have grappled with, some of us maybe are a part of the problem, and I thought it would be fun just to pull it apart a bit and see where it takes us. So, Adam, you're welcome to introduce yourself in whatever way you choose to, and then you can throw your question at me and we'll get the topic started.
Sure, Lachlan, I appreciate that introduction, just in case those of whoever's listening think that Nick sounds slightly different this time around. I am Lachlan's illegitimate cousin from California, so we can just call it New Nick if it confuses too many people. Yeah, well, thank you for having me on. As Lachlan said, I'm a member of his Patreon group, and I came to know him through his YouTube channel. And actually, by way of my father, who is also a patron and a big fan of Lachlan's, and it's been a sort of a family affair getting into audio gear, audiophilia, and by way of the channel and my association with Lachlan, the podcast. So
Although
yeah,
I
thank you
just
for
realized I do have a bone to pick with
yeah.
you, Adam. I heard
Oh,
I
okay.
heard via your dad that you'd chosen motorbikes over audio recently, that you'd sold off some audio gear to save up for a special motorbike that you're looking to buy. Is that true?
Should I cover my head in shame before I admit? Yeah, it's true. I can't deny my first and primary love, motorbikes or motorcycles. Music fuels my soul, but motorcycles fuel, recharge, recuperate. It's just a love I can't deny. But it takes nothing away from my love of music. But yes, I admit
No,
it
no, no. And I'm just
fully.
stirring.
I admit it fully. Um, yeah, so a little bit more about me. I mentioned I'm from California. My background is professionally and educationally. It's in philosophy. I hold a few degrees in philosophy, and I used to teach professionally as a specialist in ethics and critical thinking. And so the context of the question that I brought to Lachlan was around that ethics. How do we treat each other? Um, Hopefully, with the goal of treating each other well. Lachlan, you have a nice sign off to your videos that it's like be
Be
well,
kind to
treat
each
each
other.
other,
Mm.
be kind to each other. And so I've actually taken up that maxim professionally, at least for a while it was sort of paying the bills, sort of supporting family. But that's a topic for another podcast. So my question was, looking at the various audio forums, comment sections, Discord servers, Lachlan's, and otherwise. Um, Sometimes there seemed to be a great deal of strong negative, emotional, maybe anger sometimes behind disagreements. So much so that it had me questioning, in an endeavor or a personal project, a hobby that is intended to bring joy and happiness in contrast to the stresses of everyday life. Why do we see this? Is there something inherent to the hobby of audio, or is it just something about human nature that is coming to the surface there. And so my question was, is it audio? Is it not? Is it something else? Why do we see some vitriol when we
Mm.
at times when there's disagreement?
Yeah, and I think it is a really interesting question, and unfortunately, I think it's far bigger than audio. I think I mentioned in the response I posted on Patreon that I read a book recently called Troll Hunting. It was from a lady, an Australian
Mm,
journalist, who had been a victim of significant trolling and had colleagues and people she'd come into contact with who'd gone as far as taking their own lives. Not She didn't ever
mm,
suggest that it was directly a result of the trolling, but obviously for someone with mental health challenges, which I think all of us fall into that category at different times in our life, it's a really extreme thing, and the point of the book is really understanding where it's coming from and recognizing the fact that anyone who is online in any way, shape, or form, whether you're a public figure or just a person going to a forum, you're immediately exposed to all those kinds of behaviors. So it does seem to
mm,
be absolutely everywhere. As to the why of it, like the motivation behind it, I think that gets really complex and both interesting, a little bit sad as well, of course, because it's a reflection of our societies as a whole. If we contain it mostly to audio, and I think a lot of this is directly transferable, whether it's audio or anything else, but if we keep it to audio, because that's my area of expertise, I think the thing that jumps out to me first and foremost is uncertainty and the fact that
mhm,
people
mm,
crave, I believe, and I've done some, I did a course about this a while ago. It actually wasn't about this. It was a course in facilitation, which is my professional background, is also education, but in a more of a corporate sense of education rather than a university or schooling type education. And I did a course with a really exceptional educator himself, and it was meant to be what it was, all about how to facilitate a group. But in order to do that, it dived really deep into group dynamics and what
interesting.
goes on when you get people together and why do they behave the ways they do. And a lot of it comes down to those who are comfortable in uncertainty and those who are uncomfortable in uncertainty. And without going too far off track, he was talking about the fact and using the research to support all this. He was explaining how we actually learn and grow and develop by being in uncertainty. That's the times that
Mhm.
we grow, which you'd experience that as an educator yourself, Adam, I'm sure.
One of
But
my favorite words, or
mm,
I should say phrases, is "I don't know," because
yeah,
that sets us up for the opportunity to then know and discover
mm,
and learn more. So actually, that resonates with me. Yeah.
yeah, perfect. And that's, I mean, that's been something I've taken away from both that course, but also other work I've done, is that the moment you can just accept that you don't know, or you can
Mhm.
accept that maybe what you thought you knew is not the full picture, it opens you up, A, to explore, but also I think B, it gives you permission to not have to have all the answers. And
Interesting.
that to me is the key in audio, is that there are people out there, and again, as I said, it translates outside of audio, but I think there are people out there who are uncomfortable with the idea that they don't have the answers. Where that stems from is a whole nother can of worms, which we can
Mhm.
get into. But I think it starts off as them being uncomfortable to go, you know what, maybe what I thought I knew about, DAX. DAX are a wonderful topic. So there is a group of people out there in the world of audio who absolutely firmly believe that if a DAC measures to a certain degree, they all sound identical. Now,
Mhm.
my
Mm.
experience would say that there is an element of truth in that, because there are many DACs that I've reviewed over the years where I go, you know what, they're pretty close to being identical. I don't know that I could tell them apart if I didn't know what I was listening to. But then I put other DACs together, like I've got the Gustard X30 in front of me here. It's a beautiful sounding DAC. It's a lovely DAC. When I listen to it next to the Chord Dave, not only are they at different levels of performance because they're at vastly different levels of technology,
Mm.
but there's also a different character to the sound. The X30 has this wonderful, full bodied sense of presence to its sound, whereas the Dave is a little bit more kind of, I wouldn't say it's lean, but it's a bit more kind of razor sharp in ways where the X30 is just a bit more rounded. And I love both of them. I honestly,
Hmm.
I have trouble choosing between them. The X30 is that good. Um, so yeah, like that's an example where some people would go, I'm not willing to believe that. That
Hmm.
opens up an area of uncertainty where all of a sudden my belief that the DAC that I've got sitting in front of me here in my room is not necessarily the same as the other ones out in the market, that challenges me for some reason. And I'm guessing a lot of it may come down to the fact that they don't want to have to spend more money. They don't want to have to feel like they need to go and replace their $200 DAC with a $2,000 DAC. Not that I or often
Hmm.
anyone else is suggesting that they should, but I think there's a perceived implication that, oh well, if I'm watching a reviewer who says that my $200 DAC is not as good as this, let's say $600 DAC, that all of a sudden I have to go out and upgrade, and that's never my intention, and I don't think it's the
Mm.
intention of most people posting on forums. But I think that's what begins the sense of defensiveness, is like they've got to go, no, I've got to
Interesting.
hold my position here. That's my kind of take at a surface level. What do you think?
I think uh, I would agree that maybe there is a pressure to forever be being to forever upgrade, get the better sounding, more precise, better performing. But I think it also goes a little bit deeper beyond, again, just audio. And you had touched on it, and it comes back to that um, feeling of being uncertain, and that need. I think it's just a human need to know. It goes back to sort of a primal cognitive state where uncertainty means potential danger. If you don't know what's out in the world,
Yeah,
the intentions of those things around you, how things work in the world, you could potentially be in danger. And you had mentioned in your Patreon response at one point, you had mentioned that spirituality can actually come into play here. And maybe I'm getting ahead of the game, but this comes back to my time teaching courses in philosophy of religion. And now this is not specific to any one religion or spiritual path, but we all hear the phrase, things happen for a reason, and that phrase brings comfort because it dispels uncertainty. And so that brings us to the point that when it comes to audio gear, at least, there is something to be right or wrong about, right? It's not just because I often see this specifically with gear and not so much about music, right? If I say I hate Pink Floyd, or let me soften it a little bit to make it a little bit easier to argue here. I don't really like Pink Floyd. Okay. If it's a matter of taste, it's what we might call an emotive value judgment. I'm not saying there's something right or wrong. I'm talking about what I prefer or what I don't. Like if you and I go
hmm
out to dinner and the dessert course comes, and there's a chocolate dessert and a vanilla dessert, and you say, Adam, I prefer vanilla over chocolate. Vanilla is the better flavor. Okay. You haven't said that something is true or false. You've just voiced a preference,
mm,
right? And when we're in that space, I don't think there's as much at stake,
yeah,
right? You just your preference. There's no accounting for taste, as they say. But if we bring it back to gear and what measures better than something else, or what sounds, and sound can be more than just subjective. It obviously gets to an objective point of view or an objective place. Then we can get to where someone is right and someone is potentially wrong.
yeah,
And that can mean perhaps a lot for someone who prides themselves in not just audio gear, but in a specific field or hobby. Maybe if I say, Lachlan, you are wrong about this, maybe there's a like a devaluing or delegitimizing of your status as an audiophile. Like, well, if you're wrong about something objectively, then perhaps you're lesser than
mm,
other enthusiasts or other audiophiles. So I think, you know, it's I think the pressure to always be upgrading is definitely there. Like, oh,
Hmm.
you have the red. I have a little red stress ball here in the shape of a double decker bus from London. You have double decker bus DAC 123. That you could really increase the resolution and the imaging of your music if you upgrade to the 5, 6, 7, 8 version.
Hmm.
So it measures better, it sounds better, and now you're not as much of an audiophile or an enthusiast if you're not always seeking that next step. Perhaps maybe I'm taking this way too far, but I think you're right in terms of the pressure to always be always more. But I think it also gets down to a much deeper um, core disagreement of right versus wrong and beyond a matter of taste, to where it can undermine our our pride in our hobby. I don't
Yeah.
know. Do you think that's
Yeah.
too much
I
or off
think you've,
base?
no, no, no. I think you've actually touched on probably three really important things there.
Yeah,
I
too
think
a bit of a can of worms there. I
no, it's
apologize
good.
all
It's
at
good.
once. Just throwing that
That's
in there.
why we wanted to make this
Yeah,
conversation, because it's too hard in a single post
yeah.
to explore all this. So the first thing I think you raised with measurements is really interesting. So if we think about food, there is nowhere that you can go where someone can give you a measurement that is claimed to tell you if food A is better than food B.
Mm.
Whereas if I think about the hobbies that I've experienced that get a lot of vitriol, I've been heavily into, or am heavily into, photography, cars, and audio. There are three that I really love. In all three, there are ways that things can be measured that people will claim are definitive. And I think that's part of the challenge, is the moment there is a measurement, whether you or I believe that that measurement is actually truly relevant to the enjoyment of that hobby, there are people who will say, no, the measurement says this is better. A BMW has more power. This model BMW has more power than the equivalent Mercedes, or whatever brand they want to compare. In Australia, it used to be Ford and Holden was the big rivalry. So it's in cars. In audio, it's total harmonic distortion, signal to noise ratio, or cyanad, which is like a conglomeration of
Mhm.
both of those. And people look at that and go, well, there you go. This has lower cyanide, and therefore it's got to be better than that. And I think that's where we start to see the vitriol come up, is because there's a perceived objectivity there that some people want to think defines everything. And in doing so, they put their blinkers onto the stuff that we actually can't measure. Like in the car world, I might prefer to drive, and I'm just going to grab models here. I don't actually have a preference here because I haven't driven both, but one car I've always loved is the BMW M3. I think they're great looking cars. I remember my first experience of hearing one open the floodgates and fly up a road, and the sound of it was just phenomenal. And at that moment, I'm like, I want to drive one of those one day, and I probably never will at this rate, but you never know. But like, I might sit there and go, oh yeah, I love BMW M3s because I like the way it feels to drive them.
Mhm. Mhm.
Somebody else
By
might
the
go,
way,
but no, yeah.
oh, I'm sorry. I don't mean to derail your train of thought, but this is not coming across in the audio, but I'm smiling ear to ear because the M3 is brilliant. There's a 2007 335i sitting out front that is getting long in the tooth, but is just an absolute pleasure to drive. I've
Hmm.
worked on or tuned it and et cetera. Um, so I'm just saying I'm right there with you.
All
Sorry, didn't
right,
mean to
there you go.
interrupt.
No, that's great. We have another thing in common.
Mm,
So yeah, so like I might say I love the M3, and somebody else might say, well, I like the AMG XYZ. I don't know the AMG models properly. I've never understood Mercedes model range because I've never taken the time to get into it. But that other person might prefer how an AMG feels to drive, and so that's the same sort of situation as happens in audio, where we can both be right, because both of them are going to have a different feel. The way the suspension is tuned, the way the balance of the chassis has been set up, is likely different between both cars, and that's never going to show up in the horsepower figures, the torque figures, the even just the weight of the car. Yeah, it's an interesting and valid number when you're thinking about maybe straight line performance. It might give you some indication of cornering performance if one's lighter versus one's heavier, but it doesn't tell you how the car feels to sit in and drive.
Mm-hmm.
And in audio, it's the case as well. The more I've spent time in audio and getting deeper and deeper into this, and as a side note, looking back at my early videos, I watch some of them and I go, oh my God, I had no idea what I was talking about back then. I mean, I knew what it sounded like, but I didn't have any proper understanding of why and the nuances between device A and device B like I do these days. And I've still got, no doubt, so much more to learn. But the key thing is, I've learnt along the way that it's more often about the timing accuracy of the device, its ability to not screw up the timing, and even things like the design of a circuit. One design might skew the high frequency timing just a little bit from the rest of the signal, or it might be the low frequency timing, or it might be all of the timing. Each of those different tiny, tiny shifts is going to change the character of the sound that we perceive in a way that you can't measure because the measurement devices, A, can't put a complex waveform through and show us meaningful data on the other end, but B, they're not sensitive enough to that level of timing
Mm-hmm.
information. And so at the moment, there's just stuff we can't measure. And so long as that stuff isn't able to be measured, it comes down to our ears as to whether or not we enjoy something or not. We can't look at a number on paper and go, that one's better than that one.
What's interesting about that is um, there is a paper in let's see, philosophy of mind, um, dealing with things like consciousness and identity and experience. I believe it's by Thomas Nagel, and it's called "What It's Like to Be a Bat." And
Mm,
I promise this ties to audio somehow. But the claim that, maybe at some point we can measure absolutely everything in audio, right? An absolutely completed audio science. We can measure everything. Will that be sufficient to tell us what it's like to listen to something? There are those
mm.
that will say, yeah, 100%, because everything is, there's no ghost, in the machine, so to speak. It's everything is it comes down to physical science, to some degree. And once the measurements are completed, that's everything we need to know. And this has a parallel in philosophy of mind, um, a school of thinking called eliminative materialism, that the only thing we need to know about human consciousness is the material science behind it. Basically, when we have a completed neuroscience, the whole brain is mapped, right? We'll get everything, including consciousness, explained, captured. Everyone go home. Good job, everybody. But then there are those who say it doesn't matter how nuanced and robust your measurements are in your objective sciences. It still won't tell us the qualitative experience of life, of consciousness. And
Mm.
so, coming back to what it's like to be a bat, the most skilled zoologist with all the right measurements, all the bat studies, everything, A to Z is A to Z, for those of us not in California or the US. um Fully completed, it still won't tell us what it's like to soar through the air as a bat.
Yeah.
And so maybe, even if we have all the science and measurements we can around DAX and clocks and amps, and headphones, it still really won't get us the full picture of, well, what is it? What did that sound like?
Mm.
And that's something I think we can debate fruitfully back and forth. And of course, the people will get into their corners. Maybe it'll maybe even magnify the vitriol if we don't go in with the right attitude. But that's something to consider as well.
Mm.
Is even if it's totally measured and captured scientifically, maybe it still won't get us the what it's like.
And I think that also ties back into the food comment you made earlier, right? Like the chocolate versus
Mm.
vanilla thing. we might know that this amp sounds like this and this amp sounds like that. It doesn't tell us which one you're going to like and which one I'm going to like because you might have different tastes. So I was actually have just received an amp in for review. It's a new brand out of China, and I plugged it in and I had a bit of a listen and I compared it to the topping A900 amp, and they were different, very very different in terms of the topping is a lot sort of cleaner in inverted commas, maybe a bit more resolving versus a much warmer, weightier sound from this other amp, which is called the Ariadne or Ariadne. I'm not sure how you meant to say it. I'll call it the Ariadne.
Mm.
So the Ariadne's got this thicker, kind of weightier sound to it, and it sends the soundstage more forward in front of you, but it's a bit narrower as a result.
Mm.
And I listened to them and I'm like, initially I thought, I don't know which one of these I like. And then the more I spent time with it, I kept coming back to the fact that I really liked the Ariadne better. But if somebody said to me that the A900 is a better amp, I would just go, okay, you like it better. And that's I totally would understand that. And so if I had measurements sitting in front of me that defined the exact sound of both of those to a point that you could look at it and go, I've never heard it, but I know from these measurements that the Ariadne has a deeper soundstage and a slightly warmer tonality and blah blah blah.
Mm.
Yes, we can be certain of how they sound, but I still can't be certain of which one you or Joe Blogs on the internet is going to prefer because it's going to come back to that personal taste of chocolate and vanilla. And it'll be interesting to see if we ever do get to that place, like you said, will it increase the vitriol or will it
Mm.
diffuse it by saying, okay, we actually do now understand all of this. And now the only thing we can think about is personal preference and the other devices connected to it. Maybe I liked the Ariadne better because of the DAC and the headphones that I was using at the time. And with a different setup, it would have been the A900 that I preferred. Who knows? There's there's so
Mm.
much complication, and that's where the uncertainty bug rears its very big gnarly head again.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I guess it then comes back to your point about uncertainty and what's at stake. If you're
Mm,
not certain, or if I'm not certain, if you're right and I'm wrong, what's at stake?
mm,
Right. So I think this is taking us further out from just audio of what's the bigger concern if for enjoyment, for authority. Maybe you're a YouTuber and you're on a public platform. You get to say, I think this is good, why don't you take a look at this. um you're not terribly draconian.
no.
and anything you don't, this is the absolute worst thing. You don't ever come across like that or ever say anything like that. But still, there is an authority of some sort there, I guess,
Yeah.
that if you say something that I disagree with, maybe I take issue with your having a platform or having some sort of authority. You and I aren't just in a bar, with a DAC in between us
Mm.
and going over measurements, and you bring out the cables and you say, oh, this cable will make it sound better. I'm sorry,
Had to go there.
I had to bring up cables at some point. Well, because that's that people get contentious
Oh, they
over
do.
claims about cables. So maybe maybe there we have to consider what's at stake in um the power I don't know if there's a power dynamic, but just the dynamic of an influencer or a content creator versus someone at home and enjoying
Mm.
and feeling, if there's a if there's a truth value, right, being
Yeah.
made. You listener at home, you're wrong about something, in my opinion. It's almost like a one-sidedness to it, maybe. Or even if it's not a YouTube, and I don't want to single you out.
No,
But
no, no.
I read something on a forum, let's say, and someone says, oh, this amp, let's say the topping A90D, which I enjoy a lot. This is a terrible amp. It doesn't give a good tonal balance between the treble and the sub bass, et cetera, et cetera. Something, it's saying something negative about something I enjoy, I don't have an immediate way to respond in that moment. Again, we're not
Mm,
at the bar. So I feel that someone has taken advantage of my absence, perhaps. Maybe there's a concept of agency, us
yeah.
having power to do certain things, and that agency can be projected out to the world, onto others. When we cheer a sports team and we say, "Oh yeah, we won today," it's like, no, you weren't out on the field. um, you didn't win anything, but there's that shared agency of sports that maybe has some parallel in terms of content creation, or popular figures on forums who say, uh, boo to something you enjoy. It's like, ooh, you're attacking my team somehow. I gotta
Yeah.
stand up for this. So again, not just audio, but just the human condition, and dealing with things like uncertainty and what that means for our sense of self, our sense of authority versus others, our power versus others. So, um, I think you've just hit the nail on. I think you've hit the nail on the head, that the uncertainty and the I don't know is a huge factor for a lot of, at least what I was seeing and have been seeing on forums and comment
Yeah.
sections, and what kindled this question.
I think the agency point you just made's huge, and I'd never really thought about that until you just said that. But I think it's absolutely on the money. The and one of the biggest examples of that I see is when somebody will come to one of my videos and say, "Oh, well, this other reviewer said something different to you," and it's said in this accusatory, like you have to be
Mm,
wrong because that person said that. It's actually happened a couple of times with is it worth it reviews, IIWI reviews. Um,
mhm,
and he and I often, from the reviews I've seen, he and I often draw similar conclusions, but sometimes we also draw different conclusions. One of them was on the X Duo TA20 Plus amplifier. When I swapped the tubes out to some theoretically higher quality tubes, I heard very little difference. When he swapped them out, he heard a significant difference. And someone came there and said, "Oh, well, Iwi Reviews said this." And as we chatted about it, and I think I even went over to his channel and commented to him, what we both agreed was it was probably just tube variants. The tubes that they're buying to put in there probably have, they're going to be a cheaper tube, so they probably have a wider tolerance range of what's acceptable. So the pair in
mhm,
his amp was potentially at a lower level to start with than the pair in my amp, and so his benefit of upgrading was greater than mine. In other words, we were both right. There was more to the picture than just like it wasn't a direct, apples for apples situation. And yet this person came to my video as if to say, well, you're clearly wrong because my favorite reviewer said such and such. And that happens a lot. And I think it is that agency thing of this reviewer is someone that I relate to, and therefore when they speak, I feel like they're speaking with my voice because I agree with them. And if you say something
yeah.
different to them, then you're disagreeing with me, and then we get the vitriol. So definitely, I think you've really hit something there. And likewise, if I'm a fan of, like, here you go, you use your example, you're a fan of the Topping A90D. If I was to review the Topping A90D or some related product, whether it's the next version of the A90D or whether it's just topping in general that you've got an affinity for, and I don't say something nice, you could be one of those people that goes, "Well, topping's my brand, so I'm gonna jump in there and tell Lachlan he's wrong because
Mhm.
he's now abusing me by abusing this brand that I feel an affinity for." So I think that's a big thing. And I think we should open the can of worms of spirituality here because I think I think it's
I
fascinating.
Perfect timing, because
Cool.
that's where my mind was going.
All
This is
right, cool.
perfect.
It's super tangential, and yet I think it speaks to a lot of what's going on, not just in audio, because audio I don't think of, other than the fact that you can have some amazing experiences when you lose yourself in the music. I don't think of it as a profoundly spiritual practice. However, I think the spirituality side speaks more to the fragility that many of us experience when our position is challenged, when our ego is challenged, if you like. The the thing that stood out to me over the years is I've done a lot of personal work in spirituality and psychology and understanding behavior, both at a university level when I was studying, but also as a pure source of interest over the years.
Mhm.
And one of the things that really stood out to me, I read a book some years ago called Gods and Diseases. I can't remember the name of the author off the top of my head, and he's an Australian author, researcher, and he has spent a lot of time with the Indigenous cultures in Australia. And what this book, Gods and Diseases, was all about was the fact that as the source of spirituality for Australia's Aboriginal communities was stripped away from them by the arrival of the Western cultures, obviously English colonization, the health and well-being of those people in a very correlated way has just fallen apart in many cases. And thankfully, there's a lot of work's been done to repair that and improve that. I don't think it's ever going to go back to where it was once upon a time, but I think at least there's some awareness of it. But he was drawing attention to the significant impact that the loss of spirituality had on that culture and other cultures around the world, where this goes back to what you mentioned earlier, Adam, and I'm just trying to think of how you phrased it. The the idea that sort of everything happens for a reason.
Mhm.
The concept of spirituality as he was talking about it and as I see it in audio, but in online interactions in general, when people have a strong sense of their own spirituality, their own belief system, their own place in the universe, if you like, they, I believe, from my own experiences at least, that it gives you more sense of inner confidence, well-being. You're not as fragile. And I think as the world has stripped away a lot of traditional spirituality and replaced it with science and pragmatism and everything being very fact-based and rational, whilst I'm a huge fan of all that stuff, I think that brings, we wouldn't be where we are today we wouldn't be able to have this conversation across the
Sure.
globe
Yeah.
at different times in the world, and recording it to share with the 20 odd people that are going to listen to it. We wouldn't be able to do this if it wasn't for all of that. So I'm a huge
Mhm.
fan of science and rationalism and pragmatism and all those different things. But I think they've come at a cost. And it doesn't matter, as you said before, it doesn't matter whether it's a formal religion, your own personal sense of spirituality. It might just be your way of viewing yourself in the universe, which you might not even think of as spirituality or religion or anything like that. But I think when people are able to have a deep inner understanding of how they feel like they fit into the world, they're less affected by what someone else in the world says about them. They're less affected
Mhm.
by whether or not their Dak sitting on their bench is good or bad, because that's such a minor and insignificant thing in the big scheme of things. But I think a lot of us have lost sight of that. And I think sometimes, even for those of us that have maybe gained some sight of that, it's easy to have it knocked away sometimes because life is just coming at you so fast with social media, internet, the demands of our work lives, which are more and more every day because we're never able to disconnect with emails, text messaging services, again, social media, etc. Like we're always being bombarded by the outside world. It's very hard sometimes to have the inner dialogue, if you like. And I think that
Mhm.
that plays a big part into the fragility that a lot of us experience, and then the need to lash out to try to reclaim that sense of strength and power that we might have otherwise lost.
I think it's fascinating that you mention fragility and sort of instability internally, with respect to like introspection and what I might call grounding or foundational beliefs that provide that stability. When I opened in the past tense my classes in comparative religion or philosophy of religion, I liked to give the sort of the rhetorical question to begin the class of why is religion such a sensitive topic for us. It's, well, in polite company we don't mention politics and we don't mention religion, maybe sports, depending on what the social setting. Um, and it might be obvious, it might seem obvious at first glance, but sometimes the things that seem most obvious are kind of the hardest to explain. And so I just would frame this conversation with the class as like, well, we're going to be discussing different religions, perhaps disagreements between religions, nature of religions, both internal and external. So you might feel some strong feelings, and why is that? Well, I think you touched on it, that spirituality, organized religion or unorganized, provides some grounding, axiomatic, fancy word for things that don't need any further argument or basis or justification. They are like step one, stage one, ground floor beliefs in the way the world works, what it means to be a good person, what my purpose is in life. And that gives a lot of, like you said, can give a lot of confidence and ease. It dispels uncertainty and gives a lot
Mm,
of certainty. And so if I start disagreeing with you about your religious or spiritual beliefs, I am trying to dig at at least some of the core belief, with intentionally or not, some of the core beliefs that give your life stability and meaning. And so, what I was thinking as the parallel in music or similar hobbies is when I say, well, you don't understand the relationship between objective measurements and sonic quality and how things sound. I am digging at the core of your beloved hobby and what it means to be an audiophile, what's
mm,
important in audio and music and enjoying this hobby that we all share. And I mean, that is, you know, that's not an assault, but kind of a spiritual,
mm.
mental assault, that when we disagree about certain things, again, it's not just, oh, vanilla is yummy. It's, well, you don't know what is important in audio. You're not a very good audiophile.
Yeah, yeah,
So, in the parallel with religion is when I disagree about your particular beliefs or spiritual claims, I'm saying, well, you don't know the way the world works. You don't know what it means to be a good person. You don't even know, you're wrong about the nature of existence. As a
mm,
human being, that's pretty, you know, that's pretty deep, even if we
yeah,
don't know that that's the emotion that it may be bringing up. So that was my parallel with spirituality and this question about vitriol in audio, is maybe, maybe it really digs at what we think, we mean when we say I'm an audiophile or
yeah,
I'm a good person.
yep. And
So
I
it's, yeah.
think about sometimes when I see some of the posts, whether it's about, cables is an obvious low hanging fruit example, where I think about what's probably going on for someone who's angry at me for suggesting that cable A is different to cable B. And I can only assume that somewhere, whether consciously or subconsciously, there's a dialogue in their head going, what if that's right? Like at this very, the little tiny voice in your head saying, if he's right, do I now need to go through my entire system and rethink every cable I have? What do I then need to invest? How do I know which cables I should buy for each part of my system? And it can be overwhelming. And I know for me, like
Mm.
power cables and power stuff, filtering and all that sort of stuff is an area that I avoided for a long time. And I did it very consciously. Like I heard people talk about it and I'm like, yep, that's fine. Talk about it. I have no issues with you talking about it. I don't want to go there. Thank you.
Yeah.
Because I knew that it was another rabbit hole to go down. And it was the same with vinyl. I've been just kind of dipping my toe very gently, like my little
Hmm.
toe
Hmm.
in the water of vinyl, because I know it's another area that is overwhelming for me to think about, knowing that then we start talking about cartridges, we start talking about finding the right presses of albums, we start talking about which phono preamp I need to use. Like it just goes on forever. Belt drive versus direct drive turntables. I could go on for years. And that's what Nick and I have been
What's
talking
your
about on the
platter
podcast.
material? Are you a cork man or
Yep,
a
that's it.
leather? A leather
Is it?
platter.
Have you got some aftermarket damping pad instead of your normal platter material? So there's so much,
Mm,
and the so I think back. I use power as my example, and I think this through. I knew that the moment I started down the path of even considering power, that I was opening up that can of worms. And I think back to that and I go, well, if I was not able, and I mean this in a very respectful way because we're all at different places in our journey, if I had been mentally in a position and emotionally in a position where I had not been able to comfortably say, yes, I hear you talking about it, I'm just not ready to go there yet, and therefore, like we said before, that giving ourselves permission to go, I don't know, and be okay with that. If I hadn't been there, the idea of power would be quite confronting to me because I'm aware of all that it opens up, and it's scary because I'm not ready to deal with that yet. And so I do think, yeah, I do think that's got a big part to play in it. Is the the threat that somebody talking about a topic that you are either you're currently comfortable with and you want to stay there, or that you've chosen to
mm,
avoid
mhm,
looking into
mm.
because it's too much, having that presented to you, I think could be quite overwhelming and confronting for some people. And I get that. I don't think that sort of is making an apology for some of the responses. I think the responses could be healthier and more respectful, but I do understand where they're coming from in many cases.
Yeah, that you make a good point that if I'm, I come home at the end of a long day, long commute, long day at work. The boss is on me about this, that, and the other, and I come home and I see my beloved system, and I can see I have a drink next to me. I'm going to sit down and listen, and it gives me, it relieves stress. It's a release. The idea that someone would upset that by suggesting something about the system I'm used to is insufficient, and then has me start questioning the um, something I take to be so predictable and steady and stable in terms of joy and stress relief. It's like all of a sudden you're calling into question whether or not this is sufficient. So now it's no longer a source of stress relief. It is a stressor because now I
Mm,
gotta fiddle with cables and I have to. Is my power clean? I don't even like. Do I have to put something on the side of my house?
mm-hmm.
Am I getting noise? Is
How
the
would I know?
Yeah, and now it's just another spreadsheet I have to not not okay. I love a good Excel spreadsheet. I'm not casting any judgments on spreadsheet users, but is this something I have to track with, A/B testing between cables? I don't want to do, I don't want to do that. And does that call into question my authenticity as an audiophile then if I
Mm,
don't want to do that? I experienced this with the ZMF calderas, right, that I
yep.
borrowed from my audiophile father, and one of the ear pads slipped off, and I'm spoiled with the headphones that I have in my collection, that the mounting systems are very easy. They just snap in and out. And with the calderas, they required a little bit more finesse to get them around the cups. And someone suggested, oh well, if you swap pads or roll pads, change them out, you can get different sonic qualities. And aren't you worried you might miss out if you don't try new pads? And I was just willing to cut my losses and say, the stress, my personal stress over changing these pads isn't going to be worth the amount of difference that I think I might achieve. And my enjoyment, and maybe this is a claim that can be applied, it's to audio in larger than just this one topic of ear pads. But what are you looking for from your experience, and what are you willing to say, where are you willing, I don't know how to phrase this, to cut your losses, your audio fidelity losses, and just say, you know what, this could sound better if I do A, B, and C, if I swap the cables and look at my power, but I love it already, and I
Mm,
don't want to have to stress or fret over more.
yeah.
So, again, do you, back to your point about fragility, can a YouTuber or someone in the comment section rock your audio world with a claim that your power cable isn't, maybe isn't the best? Is that a cause for a vitriolic response? Or is it an opportunity for reflection of like, well, what am I looking out of? Well, what am I looking for out of my audio journey?
And I think,
It just that's sort of the full stop. What are you
yeah,
looking for?
I think that that's a really good kind of a good end point to it all, in the sense that
Mm,
I think my take on it is whatever makes someone happy is the right system for them. And if they don't have an appetite to go further, don't go further. And if that means stop watching videos and reviews, then that's what they should do. Or keep watching the reviews. I have a number of people that post on the comments, and they'll say sometimes, I'm not in the market for a new device, but I just enjoy seeing what's out there and continuing to stay in touch with the hobby. And I think that's great. Like, I think it's for each individual to go, can I continue to stay connected to the hobby and looking at new gear without it causing me any kind of stress? Or am I just happy with what I've got and I'm going to sit with that until I'm feeling that itch, that urge to go further, if you ever do? And
mhm.
maybe you never will. Maybe the next time you buy gear is because something you already have has broken. And that's the only reason you re-enter those waters. And I think that's totally fine. I think the challenge is we live in a world where, and I try my best to not feed this beast. We live in a world where there's always the latest and the greatest.
Mm,
And the I was talking to my wife about this just the other day. I had an email, and I get these all the time. I had an email from one particular brand. It's a retail brand, and they said, "Would you like to review the new SMSL? They've got a master clock and a DAC coming out, and the idea is the master clock will now work with this DAC. It's got a clock input on it."
mm,
And they said, "Do you want to review this? It's coming out soon." I said, "Yeah, I'd love to, because it's an area I've never explored, and it would be a fun way to explore it." And they said, "Great, we can get it out to you. Can you review it in September?" And I said, "No, I've almost finished producing my September content. The first available spot I can give you is actually mid-December. Are you okay with that?" And they're like, "No, I'm
mm,
sorry. It has to come out during the launch period." And I was sitting thinking to myself, why is it so important to have it come out in the launch period? If this is a product that's going to live for a couple of years, which is what it should do, as in live in the market as an available product. Obviously, it should live in someone's house a lot longer. If it's going to live in the market for 2, 3, 4, 5 years, does it matter if it gets reviewed in September or December? Like, does that really
mm,
change anything? And so I wrote back to them. I said, "Look, thanks, but I just can't shuffle the schedule around that much. I've got other brands I've made commitments to. I need to stick with that." I said, "I'll just go to a different retailer." And I didn't say this to be passive aggressive or anything. I said, "I'll just go to a different retailer and organize it through them." And sure enough, about 2 hours later, I hadn't even emailed anybody. I get a message from one of the other retailers saying, "Hey, we've got this. Do you want to review it?" And I said, "Yeah, I can't get to it till December. Is that okay?" They said, "Yeah, no problems. We'll send it out." And I was looking at that, and I'm like, this is the problem with not just our hobby, it's consumerism, I think, in general. There's this pressure that the latest, it's what we said before, the latest and greatest comes out, and it's expected that everybody should rush out and buy it. And I'm also very conscious as a reviewer, as I said, of my part in that. And I always try to not kind of hype something up as you have to sell what you have and get this, because 9 times out of 10, I might love a product. Like, there's been some products in recent times that I've absolutely adored. And I like, they're sort of product of the year type stuff for me. And I'll, like, when they come around, I will always say that. So there was the niche Pietis Maximus that I just adore.
mm, mhm,
The
mhm,
the Fiio K17 was amazing, and I love it, and I'll recommend it to anybody that needs that sort of a device. But if someone came to me and said, "Hey, I've already got I had someone ask the question the other day of a topping A70 and D70, and they were looking at that or the K17. But let's imagine they already had the A70 and the D70, and they said to me, "Should I upgrade?" I would say no. Like, I like the K17 better, and I'd probably say to them, "I do like the K17 better." But no, you shouldn't go through the expense, the hassle, the rigmarole to get what is a tiny,
mhm.
tiny little step in performance. And yet, I think the marketing and, unfortunately, the economy of the reviewer influencer world is,
Yeah, yeah.
we are I say we in the sense that there is a natural tendency for affiliate revenue and sponsorship revenue to try to drive us to get people to buy the latest and greatest things. And I just refuse to do that. Like I'll always use affiliate links in my reviews. But as I said before, I very rarely will say you really must go out and buy this. Or if I do, it's kind of tongue in cheek. Like I've
Yeah.
done that in the latest review of the Dunu Arashi headphones. At the end of it, I've said if you feel like you'd like one, and yes, you would like one. But it's more as a tongue in cheek kind of, hey, this
Right.
is a really cool product, but it doesn't mean that everyone should have to go and buy it. And my intention is to grow the channel through I guess an authentic joy of the hobby, not a consumerism, get everyone to
Mm.
buy everything I possibly can so that I make more money type of thing, because that to me would actually be out of integrity and I would not enjoy that process at all. So that's a very long way of saying I think we are under pressure constantly to upgrade, to buy the next thing, and I think that feeds into the whole issue we've been talking about.
Yeah, I mean it would be naive of us to ignore the business aspect of product development and marketing and sales. These companies are just like any company is in the business of staying in business,
Hmm.
and
Hmm.
that means selling things. But again, it's admirable, especially as someone with a platform as you have to intentionally uh, or at least to be sensitive to the anxiety that the get um, mentality can introduce into people's lives, and that some people are thrilled by it, and some people just want to enjoy what they have
Mm.
until like you said, until it breaks, and it and
Yeah.
it doesn't sound good anyway.
Hmm.
Something
Hmm.
functionally is no longer acceptable. Yeah.
Yeah, I
Um,
think it's just too important, and I grapple with it every year when Black Friday comes around, because Black Friday is a great time for me as a YouTuber. It's a great time for me to get extra views by putting out a video that's full of all the great products they could
mm,
buy for Black Friday. But I also don't want to feed into the idea that just because it's on special, you should go buy something. And so I tend each Black Friday, I tend to do a video that's more about here's what's good, but here's also a reminder: don't go buy it just because it's on special. Buy it because you've been wanting it, and now you can afford it. Just because it's on special
yeah,
doesn't
but
mean you should have it.
during that makes sense. And again, an admirable sensitivity. But I also think during that time of year, people are looking for those reviews of, all right, it's
Yes.
time to get the gifts, or this is when I've been saving my coins for the sales and the specials. I'm definitely going to be searching for, best budget, the gift, Black Friday, key
Hmm.
terms,
Yep.
So
Exactly.
in that sense, I think you're providing a service for those of us who are like, all right, now it's
What am I going to
time to
buy?
get
Yeah.
ready.
And that's it. It's walking that tightrope of going, if you're watching this, here's the list to help you if you're doing it for the right reasons, and here's the reminder to stop if you're doing it for the wrong reasons.
Right. And I personally I walk a very intentional balance because just as a going back to not necessarily spirituality but self-improvement, the personal project of being satisfied and content with what is here,
Hmm.
and not always be looking for a reason to look at what I have,
Mm.
either audio gear or otherwise, and say, well, this is dissatisfying or dissatisfactory because something new and shinier is out, because that introduces personally a lot of anxiety and stress over, oh, okay, well, this thing that I was enjoying or I thought I enjoyed now isn't as fast or as accurate as the new amp or the new DAC.
Mm.
So now I got, okay, do I have space for that? Is this, I got to unplug that? Do I have enough outlets? So I walk that tightrope as well personally of, I like what I got now versus, oh, that does look a lot better, and I think I really really will enjoy that new, that new component.
Hmm.
um yeah, I don't know if this ties back to my original question
Oh, look, I
that
think
I
it does, because
that
it's
I
all
posed,
the
but
pressures.
yeah.
It's the pressures of the new and the different, and is it better? Is it not better? Should I buy it? Should I not buy it? And that's all the
Mm-hmm.
noise. It's
Yeah,
all of
yeah.
the stuff that becomes, I think. overwhelming for people and then leads them to lash out in comments
Mm,
and abuse anybody that's adding to that sense of uncertainty and complexity in their life. So I think it all ties in, and it's
mm.
such a complicated, that if I jump back to that book I read about troll hunting, not about troll hunting, the book was called Troll Hunting. Um, the the point that she was making in there was that from her time researching and speaking to some of the self-professed trolls, there are those who go out there deliberately to troll others. Like that is their intent, is to upset the person they are dealing with. And that's a whole nother kettle of fish and gets into all sorts of psychology that I'm not qualified to talk about.
Yep.
But then there is the secondary part of it, which is those who are being made uncomfortable by whatever's being talked about and are seeking to shut it down. And I think that's the part that is caused by all that we spoke about. And it's such a complex thing that what triggers one person could be five of those things. What triggers somebody else could just be one of those things. And we are all different in that mix. And I get it too. Like I obviously don't jump on and lie and abuse people, but I will sometimes watch a video about, and sometimes it's about audio. Sometimes I'll check out an audio device that I'm interested in, but may or may not be getting in for review, and I just want to know more about it. And I'll hear somebody say something about it, or an even better experience is when I've reviewed something and I see someone else has done a review, and I'm like, oh, I wonder what they said about it. And I hear them talking, and I go, that's not my experience of it. And sometimes, depending on the state I'm in at the time, my first reaction can be, no, they're wrong, because I've heard that and it didn't do that. I didn't have that experience. But then I stop and I'm like, what if the power supply, like the mains power where they are, is cleaner or dirtier than where it is for me? And what
Mm.
influence is that having? What if it's something to do with the synergy of their system? There's so many things I can't possibly know, but I still have the same experience. So I get it. It's just part of being human, I think.
Yeah, and that's we haven't really touched on that too deeply. And like you said, we're not trained psychologists or psychiatrists, so I don't think we can really speak too much on it. But sometimes it's not about any of these philosophical issues or topics or spiritual themes, but it's just someone's having a bad day, or bringing
Mm,
their traumas and their baggages to bear, and just downloading
yeah.
downloading onto the nearest into the nearest medium.
Mm,
Just and some people just want to like to argue,
yeah.
and what that means for them psychologically, behaviorally. Like you said, it's a big other kettle of fish, but sometimes it is just that.
Yeah.
People, and actually that was my sort of finishing flavor question at the end of my longer question: is it just people being people? one
Yeah.
of my one of my favorite movies of all time, The Muppets Take Manhattan. um there's a character in it who, through partial and broken English, is trying to explain to one of the, maybe it's Kermit, one of the Muppets, the human condition. And he said, people's is people's,
There
meaning,
you go.
you know, we're just these flawed, mushy creatures walking around, and life is tough sometimes.
Yeah.
And that comes out in a lot of different ways. And sometimes it comes out as arguments over gear,
Hmm.
so um maybe it's not as philosophical as we're making it out. Maybe it is, or maybe it's all of the above.
I think it's all of the above. I think it's a big mixture of both and everything in between as well. And I should mention
Yeah.
I've been remiss here. I haven't flagged if anyone has any thoughts, opinions, hopefully not abuse on the topic, that we do have the email address of askthegroovepod@gmail.com. So if anyone wants to weigh in on that one, that they can email there. And I should also mention that for those that have emailed in since the last episode with Nick, we will read out those emails, or at least respond to those emails verbally on the podcast when Nick's back in the next week or two. So that will happen. And if you've got anything in the meantime, ask thegroovepod@gmail.com. But no, I think that's it, Adam. I think it is all of the above and everything in between. and we could talk about it for hours and hours and hours and never get to the bottom of it. But hopefully
So
it's
we
been
didn't solve
interesting.
anything?
Yeah, probably not. We
And
probably just angered a
settled.
few people.
Good.
Yeah,
Right,
that's
next.
right.
Yeah.
So
Well,
yeah, hopefully I've enjoyed the chat, and I hope others have too as they've listened along. So thank you for your time on it.
Yeah, a huge thank you. I thoroughly enjoyed this. This was a great conversation, and like you said, I can go on and on and on and on and on.
Likewise.
But yeah, I had a great time. Thank you so much.
Cool. No, my pleasure. And hopefully another conversation will come up in the future, and you can come back and join us as a guest again.
I'd absolutely love to. Yeah.
Awesome. Thanks, Adam.